Mr. Clerk, please record.
There's a quorum present, Mr. President.
Thank you. Mr. Clerk, do you have any items for the record?
I do, Mr. President. Suggested reference report from the Referencing Committee concerning Legislative Bill 1103 through LB 1133 as referenced. Notice of hearing from the Executive Board. Additionally, new bills, LB 1153, introduced by Senator Arch, the bill for enacting the state government, eliminates the Nebraska Sesquicentennial Commission that has terminated outright repeal Section 81.8309 and Section 81.8310. LB 1154, introduced by Senator McDonald, is a bill for enacting appropriations, appropriates funds to the Department of Health and Human Services, and declares an emergency. LB 1155, introduced by Senator McDonald, is a bill for an act relating to appropriations, appropriates federal funds allocated to the state of Nebraska from the Federal Coronavirus State Fiscal Recovery Fund pursuant to the Federal American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, 42 U.S.C. 802 as amended, states intent regarding appropriations to the Department of Health and Human Services, and declares an emergency. Legislative Bill 1156, introduced by Senator Holcroft, is a bill for an act relating to crimes and offenses, amends sections 25-21-302, 29-40-01, 29-40-0101, sections 28, 830, 831, 29-110, 29-40-03, 40-07, and sections 76-14-10, 28-101, and 28-13-54, transfers provisions relating to labor trafficking, defines terms, requires registration under the Sex Offender Registration Act for solicitation of prostitution and certain inchoate and related offenses, requires registration for certain trafficking offenses, changes procedures and requirements regarding registration for certain offenses, states intent regarding appropriations, harmonized provisions, provides an operative date, and repeals the original section. Legislative Bill 1157, introduced by Senator McKinney, is a bill for an act relating to the Nebraska Juvenile Code, amends sections 43-290 and 43-290-01, as well as 43-2-129, requires hearings regarding juveniles in certain counties detained at juvenile detention facilities, requires payment of certain costs by the Office of Probation Administration, harmonized provisions, and repeals the original section. Legislative Bill 1158, introduced by Senator Bostar, is a bill for an act relating to revenue and taxation, amends section 77-2716, adopts the Medical Debt Relief Act, provides certain income tax consequences, and repeals the original section. Legislative Bill 1159, introduced by Senator Ibach, is a bill for an act relating to victims, amends section 81-1850, changes offenses included within certain victim notification requirements, repeals the original section. That's all I have this time, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Speaker Arch for announcement.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, given the weather forecast and beginning this afternoon, expected to continue throughout the day tomorrow with a potential of up to 8 inches of snow in parts of eastern Nebraska, I've decided tomorrow will be a check-in day with the only business being bill introduction. Our rules debate is important. I don't want to continue it without the knowledge that a number of senators may be absent due to the weather, nor do I want anyone to risk being on dangerous roads because they don't want to miss the rules debate. So with that said, we do need 25 senators for a quorum, even to hold a check-in day. Right now, I've got about 27, 28. That leaves me a little uncomfortable. So for those of you that said, like, well, if you really need me, if you stay down here in Lincoln, certainly please come. It doesn't leave a whole lot of room for error. And if you've told me that you're going to come, you definitely need to be here. So if you indicated to me you'll be here tomorrow, please know that we're counting on you, and we will begin at 10 o'clock so you all have a chance to shovel in the morning. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Speaker Arch. Mr. Clerk for items.
Mr. President, when the legislature recessed this morning, pending was the proposed rule change 23 by Speaker Arch to Rule 7, Section 6. Pursuant to that, Senator Arch has a amendment to the proposed rule change. He is withdrawing and substituting a separate proposed rule change amendment as has been distributed to members.
Speaker Arch to open.
So this was an amendment that has been brought to me by Senator John Kavanaugh, and I think it's definitely substantive and it is definitely worthy of discussion. So I would like Senator Kavanaugh to discuss that. Do I yield time? Senator Kavanaugh, you have my
Senator Kavanaugh yielded 9:43.
Thank you, Mr. President and Senator Arch. Speaker Arch, I did tell you I'd be here tomorrow, so I'll be here. Thank you for the time, and thank you for substituting my proposal. So, colleagues, as Speaker Arch just said, this is a serious proposal, and I've been talking about it a little bit, hinting at it as we've been discussing this, and I'll get into it here first and then talk a little more. So you should have it on your desk. It's got some red writing on it. Essentially, it's the Rule 7, Section 6 of Senator Arch's proposal, and then after the new addition of such motion may be withdrawn only by unanimous consent, adding the language of a motion offered in writing and withdrawn prior to being introduced shall not preclude a subsequent motion. So the intention of this change is, it's been practice where somebody offers motions and before they get actually introduced on the floor and read across, you could withdraw them. And what has happened sometimes, people file a motion on the wrong bill and they want to withdraw it. Or as we've been talking about, what's the gamification of some of these motions and people filing protective motions. And folks, maybe once we make this change, will realize they don't want to have a motion on their own bill because it's going to feed a filibuster, a potential filibuster. So they may want to withdraw those motions that have been offered. And so this is just allowing that motions that are withdrawn before we get to the debate stage will not affect someone else's ability to introduce a motion. Decreases, again, the gamification, but also decreases the number of motions we may end up debating when they are unnecessary. And I've talked about this a little bit in kind of my general encouragement of everybody to engage in the conversation and the review of the rules and the debate. And I use this as an example of, as I said, Speaker Arch went through a process of writing these rules and came up with a proposal that served an objective. And then after he published those, I saw him and said, oh, we need to make this change that then was contemplated or is included in this proposed amendment or proposed rule change. And then we went to the rules hearing, and Senator Bostar made a suggestion that actually I think improved on my suggestion. And that's where we were at this point. And then after all of that, I looked at it again and said, well, I think we're missing this part as well. And so what I'm saying is this is a very short, this is a 3-sentence rule that has some small changes in it, but have a broad impact. And that when we're making these changes, we all need to be really dialed in and thinking critically about what the consequence of the change we're about to make is, and whether it needs another tweak. I think all of us, not all of us were on the Rules Committee, not all of us have had our input put into it, and some people don't dial in, even on the floor debate, but people don't dial in until something is being debated on the floor, and you hear somebody discussing it, and you say, wait a minute, that's not my interpretation of how this rule would work. Why would it work that way? And maybe we should change it in a way for clarification purposes so we don't get into a fight when it actually gets used, or we make sure that it is as it's serving the actual goal that we're talking about. So this is a proposal. I hope you take a look at it. If you need another copy, like I said, it's got red ink and blue ink and black ink, which is, I'm a big fan of. Everybody who knows me knows I have all 3 colored pens in my pocket, but I appreciate that the clerk's office copied these in color. And has that proposed language at the bottom. I'd be happy to take any questions people have about it. And like I said, this is something I came up with since these rules were posted on the agenda today, and I'm perfectly willing to concede that this is not the exact final product of the drafting, and maybe there's some other change that would need to be made to actually serve the goal that I'm telling you I think that we should serve in this. And so I would appreciate people's feedback on that. I wrote this quickly, but like I said, this is something that will be used by us going forward, and that we could, if you get something wrong in it, could have an unintended consequence. So that's what I hope people will engage in, that same spirit of constructive criticism and try to figure out how we can best make these rules serve the goals of this body, the goals of the people of the state of Nebraska. And like I said, I'm not exactly in favor of amending the rules at this juncture, but if we do it, I think we all owe it to ourselves and future legislatures and Nebraskans to make the best possible version of the changes that we have. So I would encourage your green vote on the amendment to the amendment. And like I said, I'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh and Speaker Arch. Senator Wayne, you're recognized to speak. Senator DeBoer, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was wondering if Senator John Kavanaugh would yield to a question or two.
Senator John Kavanaugh, will you yield to a question?
Yes.
So we're talking about you passed out the rule proposal and then you had some more written in red underneath. This is what we're talking about?
Yes.
Okay. So this was actually an interesting offering from you to me because I thought, oh no, we may have done something very wrong here. But I talked to the clerk. Apparently, if you propose one of these motions, but they don't get read across, it doesn't count as being done. So is that something that is your understanding as well?
So I guess your question is, the current practice is what you just articulated, that if you ask to withdraw a motion before it gets read across, then it stands withdrawn.
That it doesn't even have to be withdrawn, it doesn't stand withdrawn, it just never happened.
Yeah, that's my understanding of the current practice. I am concerned, however, with us making the change as we've changed it, that there's an interpretation of the rule that we're drafting that would say you couldn't do that, that once it's been offered, it is only able to be withdrawn by unanimous consent. And so I'm trying to make clear that we are not talking about those instances that are current practice.
So could we instead say a motion offered in writing and withdrawn prior to be introduced, instead of shall not preclude a subsequent motion, does not require unanimous consent? Because then, if it's withdrawn before it's read across, it gets rid of the problem where we had before, where people are withdrawing a series of motions, but it also, it handles more, I think, more directly the question that you're saying, which is, do they have to have unanimous consent? Because what this says is shall not preclude a subsequent motion, which means that it doesn't answer the question of whether it's still requires unanimous consent. Do you see what I'm saying?
I think that's a fair interpretation of it, yes.
So I would, I guess, suggest that should we adopt your amendment, that we should amend your amendment to say shall not preclude or shall not require unanimous consent.
I think we'd have to withdraw this and write another one, is how this works at this point, because we're amending an amendment.
Well, okay, so I'll say this. I don't think
that's a problem to do that.
I don't think there's a real danger that we're going to misinterpret this, particularly with this legislative history. So let's lay some legislative history. It is not the intent of this rule that any motion which has been given but not read across, has been handed in but not read across, does not require it. It does not require unanimous consent unless it's read across. That was not clear legislative history. Let me try again. A motion having been offered in writing may be withdrawn without unanimous consent. Is that correct?
Well, if it has not been read across on the floor, yeah.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
That's the intention for sure.
Let me ask the speaker a question. Senator Arch, would you yield to a question?
Yes, I will.
Senator Arch, will you yield to a question?
Yes.
Senator Arch, can you help us lay some legislative history since this is your proposal?
Right.
So instead of requiring the amendment,
1 minute.
which Senator Kavanaugh has introduced, can we just clarify on the record that a motion which is offered in writing but withdrawn prior to being read across does not require unanimous consent.
That is my understanding.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Senator Arch. All right, so you heard it here first, law clerks who are looking at the legislative history. The motion, which is introduced in writing and withdrawn prior to being read across, does not require unanimous consent. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator DeBoer, Senator Arch, and Senator John Kavanaugh. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Great, thank you. So to kind of go back to what Senator DeBoer was talking about, the intention of the rule as written is that the standard practice would continue. And the standard practice is if someone offers an amendment and asks that it be withdrawn before that amendment is introduced on the floor for consideration of the legislature, that would not count as an introduced amendment. My concern, and the reason I wrote this language, was that when you make a change to a rule, that necessarily could change the interpretation of the current standard practice. And so that's why I offered this. I think I agree with Senator DeBoer that there's a better way to write the amendment. And I agree that the intention of this body is not to make that change. But I guess I would leave it to folks about whether they want to adopt this amendment. I think there's other folks in the queue behind me, so they can speak to this. I'd be perfectly willing to make a change to the amendment as well to make it clearer, or to change that text as suggested by Senator DeBoer, but I think I'll let, oh, maybe, oh, no, there's somebody in the queue, so I will yield the remainder of my time. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator John Kavanaugh. Senator Wayne, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President and colleagues. I just want to point to those who might be watching. This is actually how you move a debate forward. So last year there was a lot of filibustering, but that was because this body chose to allow a filibuster to continue that long. We don't need rule changes to move a filibuster along. You do what's happening right now. You call the question. You make that question, you show 5 hands, and you move forward, and you just keep moving forward. So I'm a little bit opposed to most of these rule changes simply for the simple fact that we're reacting to something that we could have internally controlled the entire time on this floor. It requires a little work. It requires for somebody to be in the queue and say question. It requires for the chair to know who spoke and who hasn't spoken and what the conversation is. But at the end of the day, a filibuster only lasts so long as his body wants it to last. There's a way to move things forward, or to at least make it difficult to filibuster. What I mean by that is if you call the question over and over and over, then that person has to either drop amendments or find other ways to continue to talk. We didn't do none of that last year. So while we're reacting to some of these rule changes, which I think some of them might be necessary, so I'm not totally opposed to all of them. I just wanted to point out to those who might be at home watching for whatever reason, if you're that bored, that you can stop a filibuster or move things along just by the rules that we currently have. So moving some things and eliminating how we do motions and priority motions doesn't change anything. And I'm going to prove that this year on a couple bills that I'll probably drop 100 and something amendments, and you may file a motion or underneath these proposed rule changes to make it dilatory or whatever. And that's going to take 40 votes. And we'll see who lines up and does 40 votes. But what's crazy about that rule, and we're not here yet, is it takes 40 to do it. But if you don't got 40, you can just take 30 to suspend that rule and change the amount. So I don't understand the thresholds on so many things, because it just takes a simple 30 to change the rules. So no, I'm just saying, even if you wanted to do it, it might not have came out, but I'm saying, so like everything we're doing at the end of the day, it comes down to a vote. So the rule of this body, and the rule that people should understand, that if you have 25 votes, you actually run the rules. because somebody gets up and says objection, point of order, the chair makes a determination. It only takes 25 votes to overrule a chair. So no matter what the rule is, the chair can find that in order or out of order, and somebody can say, I challenge the chair. So the rules are there, but I'm just telling you at the end of the day, the real rule that everybody should understand going into this body is it's 25 votes to make any rule change you want by just simply overruling the chair. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think I'm the last person in the queue on this. So I appreciate the conversation from Senator DeBoer and Senator Wayne and Speaker Arch and the folks I've talked to off the mic. But I think that having the sort of actual conversation, and as Senator Wayne pointed out, we can have an actual conversation about our disagreements, about our shared goals, and still actually maybe come to a resolution in a quick fashion if we all set our mind to it. And I guess my point on this motion or this amendment to the rules amendment is that we're making a change to this particular rule. And I think it's important that we make sure that we're clear about how we intend it to be played out, because yes, all of us, I think, are going to understand, but this legislature hopefully continues on for a long time after we're all gone, and we'll have these rules. And rather than them have to go back and look for what our intention is, we have the opportunity to put it into the rules. So I'd ask for your green vote on the amendment. And I think, some other folks in there. But so if you have any other questions, I'm happy to take them. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator John Kavanaugh. Senator Hunt, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Senator Kavanaugh, I wasn't intending to speak. As we're building a record and as we're setting new precedent basically all the time, I wanted to share a few of my views on the record as my constituents watch this and look back at what we've done here in the beginning of the session. What Senator Wayne said is exactly right. All of this is in reaction to the filibuster that happened last year, but we had the power all along to stop that at any time and didn't. And we don't need a rules change to do that. We don't need a rules change to punish anybody here in the body. What we need to do is stay in relationship and keep our shared promises to Nebraskans to have a productive session. I'm committed to that. I know that my colleagues are committed to that, who I hang with and who I talk to regularly. And we've talked about that a lot over the interim. We've talked with other leaders in the body. We've talked to the speaker. We've talked to the clerk's office. We want to find out how to move past what happened last year. And that's the kind of work that happens a lot behind the scenes, not on the camera, not on the floor when we're talking about rules debates. And the reason we don't need this is exactly what Senator Wayne said. He spoke quickly and succinctly, and he said that perfectly. I'm going to support Senator John Kavanaugh's amendment because it improves the rule. But this, colleagues, gets to the whole entire point of why we don't need to be changing the rules. We've got all of these rules proposals in this binder, and Senator John Kavanaugh identified a linguistic problem with change 23, and he introduced an amendment that improves it. But there are problems with numerous rules, and we're going to back ourselves into a corner, setting new bad precedent, passing rules that aren't complete, that aren't necessary, that leave holes, that create new loopholes that are not helpful to the institution or the body. And I think that we should forego this debate, get to the work of policymaking, substantive debate, and not a single issue either, but really all of the things that we came here to work on. I understand that we cannot stop a rules debate, like that was never going to happen. I do think that cooler heads in the body, including many conservatives, agree with me, agree with people like Senator Wayne and even Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, who don't want to enter this discussion, that we just want to move forward and be productive. But there is a minority of people who think that we need to be punished, who think that we need to have this debate so that we can retaliate against what happened last year and be reactionary. And there's probably just not the votes to stop that from happening. So that's why we're here, It is a waste of time. I'll support Senator Kavanaugh's amendment because it improves a rule that was probably not perfectly written. And it would be my preference to forego the rest of the rules debate and just move on. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Hunt. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Kavanaugh, you're recognized to close on your amendment. John Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for Senator Hunt's comments. And I agree with what Senator Hunt and Senator Wayne have been saying about that. I think this, I've said it several times, I don't think we should be changing the rules at this point, but I'm trying to do my best to make an honest proposals to make the rules that are being proposed as sound as possible. I think that this clarifying statement makes this one a little bit better, in my opinion. And yes, I think I agree with the analysis that this place works well, and conflict is part of the process. And our goal is not necessarily to pass every piece of legislation that gets introduced. Our goal is to have an adversarial process that derives or goes to the benefit of the people of the state of Nebraska. And that to get some changes done sometimes requires forceful conflict and compromise, forcing a compromise through that conflict, or getting people to listen. We all know, we all get distracted. A lot of folks are not on the floor right now. A lot of folks are in other rooms, but it's important to ensure that we still preserve the ability of dissenting voices to force us to consider their perspective so that we best serve all of the people of the state of Nebraska and not just the quickest and the easiest solutions. If we didn't allow for that kind of conflict, we would pass worse legislation that does not contemplate all of the minutia and the intricacies of the lives of our fellow citizens. We've all seen that we've had to bring bills. Anybody who's been here for any length of time has had to bring a bill to fix something in one of their own bills. And the reason that happens usually is because nobody has been looked at it critically enough. And that's, I guess, my point in engaging in this process the way that I have, is that I disagree with this idea, but I'm trying to engage constructively to help make it better, which is how I would hope we could all get to on bills, that we take people's criticisms as a way of making our bills stronger and making better law for everybody. And we need to make sure that when we change these rules, if we make changes to them, that we are conscious of the value that that conflict brings, both to ourselves, to our bills, to the laws, and to the people of the state of Nebraska. So I propose this change, and I propose some others, and I will continue, I promise, to look at the rules as they're coming up to make sure that as we're discussing them, if there's something that I think could be better, then I will propose it, and I will explain to you why I think so, and we can have a robust conversation like Senator DeBoer and I were having. But I would ask everybody else to do that. I would certainly would love to hear from other colleagues who have not spoken on the rules about why they think some of these rules will help us and ways in which they think that they could be strengthened. So this is one proposal that I think makes this stronger, and I'd encourage your green vote on, I guess it's amendment, I don't know if it has a number, my amendment to Amendment 23. So thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator John Kavanaugh. Colleagues, the question is for the passage of the amendment offered by John Kavanaugh to Rule Change Number 23, which is Rule 7, Section 6. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Have all voted who care to? Mr. Clerk, record.
42 ayes, 0 nays on adoption of the amendment, Mr. President. Mr. President, continuing on the proposed rule change, I have an amendment from Speaker Arch with a note that he wishes to withdraw, as well as a motion from Speaker Arch with a note that he wishes to withdraw that as well as 2 amendments from Senator Conrad, both with indications that she wishes to withdraw. In that case, Mr. President, I have nothing further on the proposed rule change.
Could we have Senator Conrad and Speaker Arch come forward? Seeing no one in the queue, Speaker Arch, you're recognized to close on your rule.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think we've discussed the rule adequately, but all I want to say is thank you to John Kavanaugh, both for his initial input and now this amendment that just passed to this rule change. All good. All of his input made this rule better. So thank you. I ask you to vote yes.
Thank you, Speaker Arch. The question before the body is the passage of proposed rule change number 23 by Arch, Rule 7, Section 6. This will take 30 votes. All of those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
40 ayes, 3 nays on adoption of the amendment to the permanent rules.
The rule change is adopted. Mr. Clerk, next item on the agenda.
Mr. President, some items quickly. Notice of hearing from the Agriculture Committee. Additionally, new bills. Legislative Bill 1160 introduced by Senator Walls, bill for enacting the Excellence in Teaching Act. Amend sections 85, 31, 05, 06, and 12. Changes provisions relating to the Attracting Excellence in Teaching program. Changes provisions relating to the Excellence in Teaching Cash Fund. Harmonized provisions provides an operative date and repeals the original section, declares an emergency. Legislative Bill 1161 introduced by Senator Dungan is bill for an act relating to arbitration. Adopts the Consumer and Employment Arbitration Data Reporting Act. Provides a duty for the revisor of statutes. Legislative Bill 1162 introduced by Senator Lowe is a bill for an act relating to county government. Amends sections 23, 11, 1201, and 33, 117. Changes provisions relating to reimbursement for mileage earned by sheriffs and repeals the original section. Legislative Bill 1163 introduced by Senator Lowe is a bill for an act relating to motor vehicles. Amend section 66, 356. Authorize the operation of all-terrain vehicles and utility-type vehicles between the hours of sunset and sunrise if used for snow removal as prescribed. Harmonized provisions repeals the original section. Legislative Bill 1164 introduced by Senator Lowe is a bill for an act relating to State Racing and Gaming Commission. Amends section 21201, removes redundant language and repeals the original section. Legislative Bill 1165 introduced by Senator Lowe is a bill for an act relating to zoning, defines terms, provides criteria and guidelines for zoning regulations, requires certain cities to allow the use of duplex housing, provides when certain regulations govern, and provides an operative date. Legislative Bill 1166, introduced by Senator Lowe, is a bill for enacting the zoning, defines terms, requires restricting zone regulations by municipalities relating to accessory dwelling units prescribed and provides for a fee. Legislative Bill 1167, introduced by Senator DeBoer, is a bill for enacting the criminal procedure. Amends Section 291816, provides a deadline for arraignment for individuals arrested without a warrant, eliminates obsolete provision, harmonized provisions, repeals the original section. Legislative Bill 1168, introduced by Senator DeBoer, is a bill for enacting the healthcare, adopts the Uniform Healthcare Decisions Act, and provides severability. Legislative Bill 1169, introduced by Senator Erdman. It's a bill for enacting the Nebraska Historical Society, amends sections 81-1108, 26, and 82-101, 82-10102, 82-102, 82-105, 82-106, 107, and 108, and section 82-10101. Provides changes and eliminates provisions relating to the Nebraska State Historical Society, harmonized provisions, and repeals the original section. Legislative Bill 1170, introduced by Senator Reapy, is a bill for enacting the Employment Security Law, amends section 48.628 and 48.628.10 and section 48.626, changes provisions relating to the maximum annual benefit amounts and periods of disqualification for benefits, eliminates obsolete provisions, harmonized provisions, provides an operative date, and repeals the original section. That's all I have this time, Mr. President.
Mr. Clerk, for the next item on the agenda.
Mr. President, next up, proposed rule change 25 from Speaker Arch concerning Rule 7, Section 10, cloture.
Speaker Arch, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. So this is, as the clerk just read, rule change number 25, and it is the expansion of our cloture rule to include other items. My understanding is when the cloture rule, prior to the cloture rule, the way debate ceased was suspension of the rules. And so that was kind of routine. Not all, I mean, it wasn't, cloture wasn't an issue as often as perhaps it is today, the filibuster, but nonetheless, when they wanted to cease debate, it would have to be a suspension of the rules. At some point, they decided, well, maybe we ought to have a cloture rule. And so this cloture rule was instituted at that point. I don't have the year, but it strictly applies to legislative bills, not other items. And so this is an expansion of the cloture motion to other items. And let me just now get a little more specific. So it expands the cloture rule to other resolutions or main motions, not just bills. It does carve out an exception that cloture will not apply to rules, either motion to adopt permanent rules or a motion to amend permanent rules. It very specifically spells that out. Other items could include, for instance, committee reports, rule suspensions, bill withdrawals, governor appointments, which is a committee report, canceling hearings, which is a rule suspension, withdrawing unnecessary legislation. So we're just trying to say those kind of, I say, routine business items that are part of our work would fall under cloture. So currently, as I say, the only way to stop debate is to suspend the rules on these matters. It allows the legislature to do its work. I would add just one other thing, and that is the issue of full and fair debate then would apply to this. But my intention would be, if this rule changes, that we would have a category of these kind of items with a certain amount of time. And I say similar to what we do with our A bills right now, where this last session, full and fair debate indicated with A bills that they're different than the legislative bills. So A bills were 30 minutes and an hour if it was a substantial debate being engaged in. And so we would have something similar. And I don't have the time exactly in mind as to how this would happen, but that would allow us then to at least close off debate at some point and move these, I say, the business routine business of the legislature. So with that, I will stop and we can begin discussion.
Thank you, Senator Arch. Mr. Clerk, for items. Senator Wayne, please state your point.
The floor is different. What's on the board is different than what Speaker Arch just described.
The board will be changed. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Mr. President, Senator Arch would move to recommit the proposed Rule Change 25, to the Rules Committee.
Speaker Arch, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. So as I mentioned, the four bills that I have here, the four rule changes that I have here, I have structured, and this is the first priority motion that we can dispose of quickly if you choose. I would encourage you to vote no on the recommit, but if somebody wants to discuss it, it is available for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker Arch. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, colleagues. In accordance with the Speaker's guidance in terms of why this motion has been filed in order to structure a debate, I plan to vote no on the motion before us and am supporting the underlying rule that Speaker Arch has put forward and that was passed out of the Rules Committee. I think it's really important to take a step back and think about a few fundamental points in regards to this particular measure, in regards to when and how cloture applies for different business before the legislature outside of typical legislative rules. And then also to remember kind of what is really at the heart of any rules debate, and particularly this rules debate here that we find ourselves in as we embark on the 2024 session. But even though this may not be perhaps the most exciting debate for some members or for other stakeholders, our rules are fundamentally important. Parliamentary procedure is fundamental to our process and our operation and our institution, and to ensuring an orderly and effective process for each member to engage, bringing very divergent ideas, perspectives, and principles into the legislative arena. So when we're thinking about how we structure our rules and why it's important, I also wanted to just kind of embrace the learning opportunity that the Speaker and the Rules Committee have put before the body to dig into our rules together over the next couple of days. And a fundamental component of this debate is that the legislature unequivocally has the right to set its own rules, subject only to restriction, limitation, or prohibition, perhaps found within a constitutional authority. So that would be the first order in terms of primacy of authority that we would look to governing things like our rules and parliamentary procedure would be the Constitution itself. Second there too are our rules, are as codified in these familiar rule books that we all have at our desks and utilize frequently. And then according to our rules, the way that we deal with things not delineated or defined in our rules specifically is through a deference to custom, usage, and tradition. That custom, tradition, and usage has been codified informally but helpfully in a book of precedents that the clerk's office has available to help guide each legislature as they're implementing various aspects of the rules in the midst of debate. And then finally, as directed by our rule book, after we work through those initial sources of authority in that order, which is important, colleagues, then and only then for contested issues or additional guidance for matters that are not specifically addressed, would we turn to a secondary authority, Mason's rules of legislative procedure, manual of legislative procedure. So that is just kind of a good refresher about kind of the legal structure, the policy structure that our rules in particular are debated within. And then the other thing that we need to keep in mind that I've been thinking about a lot as we've engaged in good faith negotiations with those who have been
1
working
minute.
diligently, thank you, Mr. President, on the rules, is that each and every change to the rules is not reflexively an attack on minority rights or minority voice. It's important that we look at each of the rules brought forward on their own merits in terms of substance and impact. And when you look at this measure before us today, I do not believe that this is a significant threat to minority right or minority voice when we apply the cloture rule, which we're already familiar with and apply frequently to legislative bills, to committee reports, and to gubernatorial nominations. It does afford a significant amount of debate under the existing cloture rules for those important aspects of legislative business, but it does remove unlimited debate from those components, which I think strikes the right balance. And
Time.
thanks to
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Wayne, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, we, in this effort to be kumbaya, I really appreciate it. But we need to take time to actually read these rules. I don't know what underlining comma means. Underlining is usually an adjective to the noun, which would be a bill, resolution, or main motion. The reason why I say comma is because our entire Supreme Court review of the United States Constitution came down to a comma. So it's really important where you put a comma. And if you read this right now, there is actually no underlining noun in any motion. So you can't, there can't be an underlining comma. There has to be an underlining bill. And I don't understand why we're using the word underlining, because the bill is either up on the board or it's not. And I'm gonna ask some questions my next time because I'm trying to figure out what main motion means. I don't know you could filibuster a main motion. Nor do I understand what a main motion is, unless it's a motion maybe to change the speaker priority or the speaker's schedule. I guess that could be the motion on the board. But what separates that motion from a main motion? And so now I'm going through Mason's manual, trying to figure out what, I mean, I know what a main motion is. That's the underlining motion. The motion that we're like right now, the main motion is a motion to recommit. Any other things would be subsequent to that. But if you do a cloture vote, you do a cloture vote on everything on the board. So I'm not sure how that would be different, unless it's just a motion that you're also allowing an actual filibuster to go on a motion. So on the face, this sounds like a simple thing that we should all agree to, but I think being the person who my texts don't make sense half of the time because I don't follow grammar, I think if we're going to put grammar in the rules, we should have not a comma after underlining. But I'm not sure why you even need the word underlining. You can't have two bills on the board. So why do you need underlining underneath the bill? There can't be LB 1027 on the board, and we're also going to vote on LB 1028. There can only be one bill on the board. So what's the underlining bill? Is there another bill that is secretly not on the board? I don't know. It's a great question. As far as resolutions, I mean, I don't care if that's there, but I don't understand the main motion. Either it's a motion that is on the board and everything else is incidental or secondary, or it's just the motion. So Not sure what that means, but I'll ask some questions here. And maybe nobody else finds the underlining comma an issue, but I think it's one, because I don't know what underlining is in this category. Senator DeBoer, will you yield to a question?
Senator DeBoer, will you yield to a question?
I would be happy to.
Senator DeBoer, the question is, what does underlining comma mean?
Well, I have been told that when we have, because it doesn't mean anything. You're correct. You have found a grammatical error. We have been found out.
Okay.
So that was the king, the
1
little
minute.
king, the little baby in the king cake. Justin Wayne has won. We need to get that fixed. The clerk says that because we do not have an ENR process, since there's only one stage of debate on rules, they traditionally, and this has happened many times before, fix the grammatical errors on their own after we pass any proposed rule change.
That is very dangerous. I mean, again, Marbury versus Madison came down to a comma. And that's what guided the entire Supreme Court to be able to determine things to be constitutional or not constitutional, is because in our Constitution, there was a comma that said the Supreme Court could. So just allowing bill drafting, why I love them so much, our revisers, it matters where that comma is when we vote on it. And so right now, underlining has no meaning. So we're just gonna assume that they're gonna fix it when they reprint next year?
Time.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne and Senator DeBoer. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, colleagues. Good afternoon again. Sorry, I ran just a little bit short on my last time on the mic, and I wanted to finish some of those thoughts. But in regards to the important drafting issues that Senator Wayne has identified, I think the body has at least a few options that we can think through in regards to making that correction. We can, of course, file a floor amendment. I had some substantive amendments on these various rules that I would be happy to perhaps ask for your unanimous consent to swap out, or we can rely upon past practice, as was mentioned earlier, to make only technical corrections for essentially what is a scrivener's error, rather than any sort of substantive drafting issues. So I think that while the members discuss those different remedies to address the issue that Senator Wayne has brought forward, we do have a variety of different options available to us. Colleagues, a couple of pieces in regards to this specific rule that I wanted to make sure to lift up when I ran out of time on the mic last was what I think is important about this rule is also what's not in this rule that has been introduced and advanced. And that's a significant part of good faith negotiation led by the speaker and has been a very robust discussion amongst many members over the last weeks and months. So when it comes to looking at how our cloture rule applies, of course it's important to remember that the utilization of cloture should be a fairly extraordinary remedy. We should not rush to cease debate. We should not rush to stop debate as the only deliberative body in the state of Nebraska. It is important to ensure as much debate as possible on the key issues before us. However, when there needs to be an opportunity for the body to effectuate the will of the majority to move forward on different measures, we cannot and should not give veto power to any minority to thwart that. So cloture seeks to strike the right balance in whether or not we cease debate, whether or not we allow the debate to move forward, whether or not a significant amount of those in the minority position can come in to kill or stop a bill at that point in time. So, of course, we're familiar with it when it comes to utilization and application in legislative bill debates. But for these other matters, based on historical negotiations, when cloture was adopted in our institutional practice and policies, there had been a negotiated agreement to exempt out committee reports. Think of things like the Committee on Committee reports, for example, that has generated significant debate and dialogue, including last year in regards to the committee assignments, or things like gubernatorial appointments. And the reason some of those measures were exempted out from application were to ensure that those checks on other branches of government remained robust, including the executive. And that was
1 minute.
one way to effectuate that through our rules. Thank you, Mr. President. But colleagues, what you will notice if you've followed this process closely was that in initial ideas put forward by the speaker, there was also an application of the cloture rules to the rules themselves. And that was found to be highly objectionable by many members, including myself, because we really felt like that tipped the balance too far, and would be a very, very dangerous precedent to adopt in regards to how we conduct our business. So I applaud the speaker for working in good faith in very tough negotiations over the last weeks and months to remove that component of the cloture rule and its application. And I think what has come before us from the Rules Committee is a reasonable compromise to help effectuate the rule of the majority and protect minority rights. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Wayne, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I'm going to say again, rules come down to 25 votes, and I've always felt that way. But hear me out again. By specifying here that, let's say we scratch underline and comma, and we say bill, resolution, and main motion. Now, I'm going to make a very technical argument here, but bear with me on why I don't like the word main motion. Main motion right now on the board is to change Rule 7, Section 10. The secondary motion, or incidental motion, or there's other ways to describe it, is the motion to recommit. So if I invoke cloture, I'm going to invoke cloture per this rule on the main motion. My argument would be, if I'm the one who offered the recommit, is that's fine, but you can't get to your motion, even though it's the main motion, because you would have to first invoke cloture on my secondary motion to recommit. That is the only way you're going to get there, because you're specifying main motion. So it's cleaner if you just say motion. So then in your motion to invoke cloture, you cite your bill, your underlying motion, and your underlying amendment, and your underlying amendment, so you can invoke cloture on everything. Sounds technical, but in a rules debate, I would argue that. And I would say, as long as you are specific about main motion, then you can't invoke foreclosure on any incidental or secondary motions. That's just how the rule reads. Now, Chair may ignore me and say, no, it means the whole thing. I read it differently. But if they're going to come back and read this transcript, they're going to say, this was pointed out, that you can't get to the main motion for foreclosure if you can't foreclose on the secondary motion. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd ask if Speaker Arch would yield to a question.
Speaker Arch, will you yield to a question?
Yes, I will.
Thank you, Speaker Arch. This is a gotcha question. Just kidding. We already talked about this, but I wanted to make sure that we spoke about it for the whole body. So when a committee report comes out for gubernatorial appointments and there's a group of them, you can still divide the question, correct?
That is correct. And that's fairly common to come out as a group and not one at a time. And so, yes, dividing that out is going to be able to continue.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you answering that question. As you know, I love voting on things individually, and I would not want to give up that opportunity, though I do recognize why we do it that way. But I think if you're a gubernatorial appointee, you might want your day in the sun and have an actual conversation about you on the floor. So that's why I'm a stickler for that one. Would Senator Wayne yield to a question? It's definitely a gotcha because I didn't tell him in advance.
Senator Wayne, will you yield to a question?
Yes.
First of all, thank you for talking about commas. You know I have a deep-rooted love of commas. I did come in to the tail end of your first conversation about the comma, and I wanted to make sure I was following along. Are you taking umbrage with the comma after underlying in the first sentence?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that doesn't make sense. I'm
No.
with you. So we probably need an amendment to strike that comma, correct?
Correct. And I think there's one coming. And I mean, to give credit, when I read rules over and over, I read what's there or what I think is there and not what's actually there. So.
Sure, yeah, but in the law, as you said, that matters. So then I have an additional question, and maybe you already addressed this, but the underlined part that's accept the motions to adopt permanent rules or amendments to the permanent rules may not be subject to cloture. I see that there was a period, but it also looks like it's stricken?
Yes.
And then, but then the T is capitalized for the next sentence. So do we need to reinstate that period?
Correct.
Okay. Do I need to get an amendment for that, or is somebody?
Yeah, I'm not doing it.
You're not doing it. Okay. Just insert period. Okay. Well, thank you. Then I will be just drafting a quick floor amendment. Thank you very much, Senator Wayne. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh and Senator Wayne. Senator DeBoer, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I definitely don't want to bring a rubber band to a gunfight, but I'm going to talk to Senator Wayne about what he's discovered here. I think that, Senator Wayne, the discussion about main motion that you're having here says that we would not treat the recommit to committee as, your reading is, we would not treat the recommit to committee as a cloturable motion if we just have the rule written as main motion. But my understanding is we've been doing this with bills since 1991 session, which says that whatever's on the board gets clotured together with the top of the board, which is the bill that's up there. So by the transitive property, whatever's on the board under the main motion would get cloturable just like the bill would. So I don't think there's a problem because this is how we've been operating with bills since the cloture rule passed. Senator Wayne, would you yield to a question?
Senator Wayne, would you yield to a question?
Yes, I will.
Do you follow my logic there that with bills, when we have other things on the board, even though it says bill in the cloture rule, everything else that's on the board is part of the clotured motion? Is that correct?
That is our current practice, but we are also changing the current rule, so there is no practice going forward.
Well, we're not changing the rule with respect to bill since we're going to erase underlying and comma.
Correct, but we are changing and adding the word main motion, and the reason for that is majority the reason for it is committee reports, i.e. appointments.
Correct.
So the main motion would be the committee report. A secondary motion would be a motion to recommit.
Right. But if we treated a main motion, which is at the top of the board, the same way we treat a bill, which is at the top of the board, then it would follow that everything we've been doing with subsequent or subsidiary motions in bills would similarly be done with main motions. Is that right?
Right. So you're suggesting that the word bill and main motion be treated the same, and I'm saying we don't have a history of that.
Of treating them the same.
Correct.
Well, we could right now say that's what we mean.
Is that what you mean? That's the whole point. I don't think that's what it means.
That was my understanding in the Rules Committee.
And that's not how the plain language reads.
I do think it is how the main motion being top of the board like a bill, that seems like the plain language to me.
Where do you see like a bill in there?
No, it doesn't. They are whenever you have a list of things separated by commas, they are deemed to be similar things.
So here's what I'm telling you though. So main motion right now on a committee report is not able to have a foreclosure, right? It can go forever.
Correct. Prior to the establishment of
So
this
you're
rule.
changing that practice by using the word main motion to create a new practice that we currently don't have.
Right, but it is put in concert with the word bill, which we do have the practice around, and I'm saying we could treat it the same as bill, and it would be.
And I'm saying we 100% could treat it the same, but we also spell out permanent rules or amendments to permanent rules.
Well, I have an amendment that would change that to permanent or temporary.
Oh, because so you acknowledge we don't treat temporary rules the same as we do permanent rules, just like we don't treat, so even if you add comma in there, you're not going to treat them the same because historically we don't treat them
You
the same.
can't do a comma with two things in a list.
You can't do a comma with two things on a list?
No, you have to have three to have a comma.
Correct. So it's amendments or permanent rules or temporary rules. It's whatever. I'm just saying that's not how it reads. So
How would you like it to read?
motion.
But then that doesn't get at the main motion.
It gets at all motions on the board.
It wouldn't get to the committee report.
Why don't you just put, if the issue is committee report, why not just put committee report?
Because I don't actually think that's what we call them. Anyway,
No, it says committee report up on the board.
okay.
And it
well then-
lists it lists the committee. So if we just don't want to filibuster or have a culture on a committee
would be-
report, let's just put committee report.
It would be committee
Time.
report.
Thank you, Senator DeBoer and Senator Wayne. Senator Wayne, you're recognized to speak, and this is your third and final time.
Thank you. I think I only spoke twice because I wasn't here for one, but that's okay. Or maybe I was here for all of these. It doesn't matter. It's a great day to be in Nebraska. All I'm saying is, whatever you guys want it to be, it's fine. I will adjust. I just pointed out some things. It doesn't matter what the rule is. I do think what you're going to see moving forward is what just happened here, is every bill introducer is going to file their own motions, priority motions to recommit, et cetera, to take away that opportunity for other people to do so. Then that, to me, makes the motion to recommit and the motion and the priority motions null and void. So we might as well just get rid of them. Because if you as a bill introducer don't want those three priority motions put on your bill, when it comes out of committee, you're going to file them. Or before it comes out of committee, you're going to file them. Then you're going to file them with the clerk on select, and you're going to file them with the clerk on final reading, so you can withdraw them. Just what's going to happen. I mean, there's no way that I wouldn't do it. As I'm just talking about all the rules that I'm seeing proposed in conversations and what I'm hearing. Again, I don't know why we're doing this, so I'm kind of against it. I'm just not going to spend all my time. There's some other things brewing that I'm going to spend 54 days talking about, particularly about all the people who are profiting off of North Omaha. We're going to get into that, and so that'll be some fun conversations. But as far as the rules, let me be clear what the rules are. The rules are 25 votes. It's called overruling the chair. That's all you have to have. If you don't think there's been full and fair debate, overrule the chair. If you want to call the question and the question's not, and you see 5 hands, but he says, no, there hasn't been full debate, overrule the chair. If you want to introduce a bill and they say, no, you can't, overrule the chair. It's 25 votes. So do with it how you will. It won't change how this legislature is going to operate this year. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wayne. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. A very critical grammatical update for everyone. There is an amendment coming that strikes underlying comma. And Senator Wayne, I didn't realize that you were striking underlying in addition to the comma, but it does make sense. I also want to just note for the record that this is a serial comma, so I'm pretty excited about that. I think you all know how I feel about serial commas. They provide clarity. They're not necessary, but they provide clarity. And also there's going to be that period reinstated after the second cloture in this. Though sitting here listening to Senator Wayne's comments and expressed concerns about this rule change, so I pulled up old agenda to see, because there was a conversation between Senator Wayne and Senator DeBoer about how we say committee reports. And we do actually have on let's see here, this is May 25th, 2023, day 85, there is legislative confirmation reports. And so that does actually bring up a very great question. I don't even know if those reports would be covered under this, because they're not, this isn't a motion, this is a report. So do the committee confirmation reports, are they covered under this if we call them legislative confirmation reports and not legislative confirmation motions? Would Senator DeBoer like to yield to a question?
Senator DeBoer, would you yield to a question?
Yes.
Go ahead.
The thing I think is that you motion to accept the committee report. So the motion is to accept the committee report.
Okay, but to Senator Wayne's point, or main motion, so then does this not cover additional motions?
So yes, if you would, you heard what we talked about, but I think the point of not just pointing out committee reports was that there are other main motions besides just committee reports.
What are the other main motions?
I knew you were going to ask me that.
You told me I could ask you anything I wanted.
I was really stupid. Motion to withdraw a bill would be one. So that would be a main motion.
Okay.
That's what I got right now.
Okay.
There are others.
But the priority motions are not considered main motions, or are they?
No, because that would not be the initial top. They're never the top thing on the board.
Okay. It's the light bulb's going on.
Yep. So something that's the top of the board.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, for everyone at home, so we always say the board, what's on the board, top of the morning to you. The board is telling us what is happening on the floor. So right now the board says amendments to permanent rules, proposed rule change 25, that's the number of this rule change, Arch, Rule 7, Section 10, and now we are recommitting to committee, which I missed that part when I got on the floor. But this is very helpful. I appreciate that Senator DeBoer and Senator Wayne having attorneys, as you both are, looking over these changes, I think is really critical, because a comma here, a period there could change the entirety of how our rules changes can be interpreted. And knowing that a main motion could be more than just the committee reports, which
1 minute.
I did not know that it was more than just the committee reports. So that is helpful to know. But I guess we kind of missed the whole conversation about whether or not you should be able to, and this is going to sound real rich coming from me, I don't know that you should be able to filibuster the withdrawal of a bill, but we haven't had that conversation. And this would, in fact, provide cloture on the withdrawal of a bill. But I've withdrawn bills before, and it usually is a very short process. I think we've had several withdrawn this week. And so, in the normal course of the legislature, we don't tend to filibuster our withdrawals of bills. So I'm going to give myself, I was in the queue, sorry. I think I covered everything I intended to cover with grammar. and motions. And
Time.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh and Senator DeBoer. Senator Duncan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I was actually, I apologize for taking a little bit more time than I meant to here. I was trying to pull up Mason's manual because this idea of what is a main motion is one that was not something I was able to find in our rule book. And I did a little Apple F or a find option here on the rule book that I have on my computer, and main motion was not defined in there. And so I was trying to pull it up. And of course, now that I'm on the mic, I'm struggling to find it. I do want to highlight as I continue to scroll through here that I do agree with Senator Wayne that we do have to be very careful about this. It sounds like we're echoing the same sentiment time and time again, but the rules are important. I was having a conversation with somebody recently about how when we start changing the rules willy-nilly, the legislature starts to feel like Calvin ball. For those who aren't familiar with Calvin ball, it's a sport where the only real rule is that you can't have the same rule twice, and you make the rules up as you go. So we obviously do not want the legislature to resemble Calvin ball, because then it's just essentially going to be mayhem. So I do think that having guardrails in place is important. I also agree with Senator Wayne that we need to look through these with a fine-tooth comb. I think his legal lesson about Marbury versus Madison coming down to a comma is also important, because that does matter. And I remember last session, as I was trying to learn the rules and trying to figure out exactly how this all operated, it was frustrating for me, because coming from a legal background, it's usually clearly delineated in statute how things operate. And if statute is not entirely clear, you can almost always find case law or certainly court rules that I think lay out how things are supposed to operate. I was a little frustrated, I think, being new to the legislature, that was difficult to have an analogous thing here. The rules are pretty short in our rule book, and they can change. And that's kind of what we're dealing with here. And so it's frustrating, because you want there to be some arbiter beyond just ourselves over how things operate, how things work, and what historical precedent is. But I do think it's a little bit frustrating to try to connect the dots with what is how the rules should work and how they currently work. So I did find here the main motions, and I want to just take a second to make sure I'm on the right page, and we can talk a little bit more about what the main motions look like, because this is something that is important. The term main motion is used in its broad sense to include any proposition or matter of business presented to the body for its consideration. As a convenience, the term main motion, in quotes, is applied to all propositions of this type, whether they be bills in a state legislature, ordinances or orders in a local legislative body, or whether they be any question presented for the final determination of the body in any other form. A main motion presents an item of business to a deliberative body for its action or decision. Main motions are distinguished from the many procedural motions, like the motion to adjourn or to lay on the table or postpone, which relate to what the body will do or how it will proceed with its real business, which is the consideration of main motions. So I think that's kind of an arcane way of saying what we've already said, which is that the main motion is what's at the top of the board. It's the thing that we're considering. And then all of the other procedural logistical motions, like IPP and things such as that, are the motions that we're then operating on in order to reach the consideration of the main motion. There is more about main motions in Mason's manuals. I'm not going to read that all into the record. I'm not trying just to bore people to death here, but
1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mason's manual is informative. For those who are tuning in for the first time or didn't follow along with some of our rule debates previously, you'll know that in our rule book, it essentially says that Mason's manual can be informative or helpful if there's a question as to how our unicameral rules work or operate. And so I think it's really helpful to have a copy of Mason's manual, because for questions like this, which frankly I had never talked about before or read about, it's helpful to be able to delve into some of the history and background of things like the definition of main motion versus a more procedural motion. With that, I generally am probably going to be opposed to the recommit to committee, but I am still open to listening to the conversation from all my colleagues. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Duncan. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak, and this is your third and final time.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wasn't intending to speak again, but just to resolve the ambiguity, perhaps. I'm glad that we had this opportunity for this discussion because, like I said, when I was approaching this debate, I was thinking about how our words and how our acts either strengthened or weakened our institution in this debate. And I think thus far our words have strengthened the institution, and I think our actions have been thoughtful to strengthen and advance the institution in the context of this rules debate thus far as well. The other lens that I was thinking about in regards to this debate is an opportunity to embrace a learning opportunity, so to speak, for all members, but particularly new members, to dig into the rule book and think about what the rules mean and why we have them and how we use them, because it is a critical component of our work and sets appropriate guardrails that should apply equally to all members, regardless of the contentiousness of any measure that should come before the body, and help us to maintain order and an effective, efficient process as we move through those challenging issues. But just to lift up and to clarify, and I think we've heard some of these, the application of cloture to main motions is different than subsidiary motions, which I think there can be some confusion about. So the main motions being the primary act, like a motion to withdraw, like a motion to suspend the rules. The legislature can essentially only effectuate its work or act through really three main mechanisms: by taking up and acting on a main motion, through work and deliberating and or adopting or rejecting a resolution, and the same applicable to legislative bills themselves. So our legislature is confined to our actions through main motions, resolutions, and bills. When you think about things like a motion to bracket or a motion to recommit or otherwise, those what we typically call priority motions are not main motions, but rather subsidiary motions that help to guide the process and guide debate on those other matters, those other vehicles like a main motion, resolution, or bills, and are not equally available to each and every one of those vehicles, dependent upon what kind of issue is before the body. So the other thing that I want to note that's really important to how this particular rule that is before us plays out is that it doesn't end debate or even extended debate on things like a committee report, which typically could be known to us through a committee on committee reports indicating committee assignments, or even gubernatorial appointees, which come to us as committee reports. So it is absolutely critical that the legislature not lose an important aspect of effectuating our checks and balances as a co-equal branch of government. So when we interface with the executive, the governor gets to make appointments and we get to hold nominations hearings and then give a thumbs up or a thumbs down as to those particular nominees, either in a group that emanates from committee or one by one. And so thank you, Mr. President. I think what is important about this particular rule change is that it still entertains a significant amount of debate on a key separation of powers, checks and balances kind of component that's important to our work and important to ensuring that we remain an independent, co-equal branch of government. But at some point, usually around 8 hours or so, if debate has not resolved itself organically, it does seem to make sense to allow for some effort to finally force a vote on key appointments so that work can happen. And I worry without this and without appointments having the opportunity to receive an up or down vote, we'll see more and more interim appointments, which could in fact have an unintended effect of
Time.
diminishing checks and balances and separation of powers. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Arch, you're recognized to close on your motion, seeing no one else in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would ask that you vote no on the motion to recommit.
Seeing no one else in the queue, the question before the body is to vote on recommit. The motion is to recommit to committee under proposed rule change 25, Arch Rule 7, Section 10. All of those in favor vote aye. All of those opposed vote nay. Mr. Clerk, record.
2 ayes, 30 nays to recommit the proposed rule change, Mr. President.
The motion fails.
Mr. President, next item on the proposed rule change, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh would move to reconsider the vote just taken as to the recommit motion on rule change 25.
Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm just a creature of habit here, I guess. It's kind of my go-to to never vote on something unless I'm actually going to vote on it. And so, and part of the reason is just my name is not spelled correctly. It's missing the V. Just to bring us all up to speed. Since we're having a rules debate, why not talk about rules and how they work? So Senator Arch put up a motion to recommit to committee, which would mean if that last vote had 25 green lights, it would have gone back to the Rules Committee for the Rules Committee to decide whether or not they wanted to send it back to the floor or amend it and send it back to the floor in a different state. If you are present not voting, you can make a motion to reconsider the vote that was just taken. But I learned last year, you also can make a motion to reconsider the vote if your vote was in the minority. I'm looking up at the clerk to see if that's right. Yes, okay. So I was present not voting on this last vote, but Senator John Kavanaugh voted green. So he could have introduced a motion to reconsider his vote because I think there was only a handful of people who voted green. Now, why have a motion to reconsider your vote? Well, if you voted one way and you were perhaps confused about the vote, which we had earlier today when we had a call of the House and a vote for calling the question. The two votes kind of got conflated and people didn't realize that they were voting for one over the other. So this would be an opportunity, although I have to admit, I'm not 100% sure. Can you do a reconsider of a vote on a calling of the question? That would be something to look into. I'll probably be asking that of, I really wish I could ask the clerk to yield to questions sometimes because it would be helpful to just get that answer on the spot for the record, but I will ask the clerk and follow up with everyone at a later date. Okay, so this is a motion to reconsider the vote. So if you change your mind and you want to actually change what your vote was, this would be an opportunity. This has actually happened successfully a couple of times. Last year, I believe Senator Conrad introduced a motion to reconsider a vote of a gubernatorial appointment, and that was successful. And I don't know if it was 2 years ago, but Senator John Kavanaugh introduced a motion to reconsider a vote that was successful because I think it was 2 years ago on gambling maybe, and people thought it was anyways, that people were genuinely, they voted one way, not realizing. And so then we had a motion to reconsider, and the votes kind of came around to the 25 that were needed to move it forward. It might have even been an amendment. Anywho, it is a useful tool in this toolkit to keep things going in the direction that we want. And it also is a useful tool sometimes to just take time. But every tool of process can also be a tool of time. And I wasn't really particularly using this right now for taking time. I just kind of like do this sometimes, just, oh, let's do a motion to reconsider. You can let everybody chit chat about what they want to see happen next. But I do think that we have some amendments that we probably should get to, like that ever important underlying comma and reinserting that period. So I will withdraw this motion. Thank you.
Motion is withdrawn. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. President. Next item on proposed rule change 25, an amendment from Speaker Arch to the proposed rule change with indication that he would withdraw and substitute an amendment from Senator John Kavanaugh.
No objections, so ordered. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to open.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, colleagues, for the great discussion we've been having on this. Appreciated Senator Wayne and Senator DeBoer's robust conversation about what these things mean. And I do think that it was really valuable, and it does demonstrate how this conversation should go. Senator Wayne pointed out some actual typographical errors, or whatever you want to call it, Scribner's errors. I like that word. That's a great one. Lawyer word from Senator Conrad, that need to be fixed, and the best practice when we have the opportunity is to fix it. But the other part, and Senator Dungan, my roommate, went and looked up the definition. He looked first to our rules, didn't find a definition for main motion. So then he went to Mason's, which is what our rules direct you to do, and found a definition of main motion, which I think was helpful in elucidating this conversation so we all know what we're doing here. Because I'm sure a lot of folks read this rule, myself included, and sort of skimmed over and said, oh, I know what they're talking about here. I know what the speaker is getting at in this proposal, and didn't go and look at what the word main motion meant. But then we come to find out some people interpret it as, committee reports. Some people maybe didn't think about committee reports and only thought about motions to withdraw. But to have that clarity is great. And we get to that clarity by people engaging in the conversation, asking questions, and drilling down and us finding the answer. So we're all on the same page when we get to that point. So I think that's a really important part of this conversation, this debate. And as a result of that, I think we're going to do a better job. And I think we should try to hold ourselves to that sort of inquisitive standard on all things and try and get to that point. But the reason I'm talking is my amendment. And again, this is one of the ones where I kind of read this thing last night after I saw it was on the agenda for today. And I thought to myself, what's missing here? So my proposal, which you all have in front of you, or should have in front of you, adds to, I think it's the third line, which states that cloture may be invoked by the introducer of the bill, the chair of the committee in which it's introduced, or the vice chair. Or I'm adding or the vice chair if the others are absent. And I thought of that was helpful because we all know, like tomorrow we're talking about weather. Some people might not be here. Some folks are out sick sometimes, and maybe for long periods of time. And if we're debating a bill and the chair of the committee is not there, or more likely now, if we are debating a committee report for appointments and the chair of the committee is not there, the rule would preclude, as currently written, the vice chair from invoking cloture on that committee report. So in my opinion, this is a nice to have. And while we're, as long as we're under the hood, we may as well do this part too, is kind of my thought. But I think it is not something that's going to come up all the time, but it is something that when it does come up, we'll want to have this option. So it's just adding in there that when necessary, the vice chair is empowered to ask for cloture as well, in addition to the chair, if the chair is unavailable. So I think this has been a really good conversation, and I hope folks continue to talk about these rules and think about these rules as we're going over the next couple days or however long we talk about them, and bring the kind of energy that Senator Wayne brought to this conversation that is helping us to make a better product. So I'd encourage your green vote on my suggested change to this amendment, and be happy to take any questions. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator John Kavanaugh. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you. I have updates. Senator Clements, thank you so much for bringing this to my attention. I was incorrect. Rule 7, Section 7A, Line 2, reconsideration if you are in the prevailing side or not voting, not on the failing side. So I want to correct that for the record. And I also spoke with the clerk for 2 other clarifications. I can actually ask the clerk for clarifying questions on the microphone, which he should not have told me, but I'm not going to do it today. But that is a dangerous thing for me to be able to do. But he did provide on why you cannot do a reconsider of your vote on a vote to call the question. And that is because it is a motion or a vote that you can take and do again. So if you were to call the question and it failed, 5 minutes later, you could call the question again. So, but if you did that on an amendment, we can't vote on the same amendment multiple times. It has to be different. So something that's renewable, you cannot reconsider the vote on, which I very much appreciate. I wasn't sure if Senator Kavanaugh was saying that this was a great conversation with himself on opening on this bill, or this was a great conversation on this rule change writ large, but I just wanted to point out that it appeared to me that you were having a great conversation with yourself. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. Senator Arch, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just wanted to again thank Senator John Kavanaugh. He's absolutely correct. While we're at it, let's make it as clear as possible, because we don't need to keep talking about interpretation. We should just make it as clear as possible. So I certainly do support this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Arch. Seeing no one else in the queue, the motion before you is amendment. Excuse me, Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to close. Senator Kavanaugh waves. Seeing no one else in the queue, the question before the body is the passage of amendment offered by John Kavanaugh on proposed rule change 25, Arch, Rule 7, Section 10. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Mr. Clerk, record.
36 ayes, no nays on the adoption of Senator John Kavanaugh's amendment.
The amendment is adopted. Mr. Clark.
Mr. President, next item, Speaker Arch has an amendment with a note that he wishes to withdraw and substitute for Senator Conrad's amendment, striking underline, comma, and inserting a period after the second word cloture in the first sentence. That will be distributed to members.
Without objection, so ordered. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to open on your motion.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, colleagues. I want to thank Senator Wayne and Senator Michaela Cavanaugh for identifying some technical drafting issues in regards to this proposed rule change and an amendment that will be effectuated as an amendment to our permanent rules. So in terms of looking at how to structure the debate after the proposals emanated from the Rules Committee, I did see at least a few areas that were perhaps good opportunities for clarification or harmonizing different aspects of our rules. So I filed serious substantive amendments on a few of Speaker Arch's proposals that had been advanced from the committee. Because we had those amendments in place, we have worked collaboratively with Speaker Arch, with the clerk's office to address the issues that Senator Wayne and Senator Michaela Cavanaugh have identified in regards to technical matters or scrivener's errors to ensure clarity and appropriate, accurate punctuation and grammar in the proposed rule change. So it is not a particularly substantive measure that has been substituted and is before you. It has been worked out collaboratively. I'd be happy to answer any questions, but would urge your green vote in regards to this measure. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator Duncan, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I would urge you to vote green on this amendment. I do rise in support of Senator Conrad's amendment. Again, to reiterate what I said previously, I think that Senator Wayne did point out some substantive concerns with regards to the actual transcription of this. I think that it was probably a scrivener's error, but I also think it's important that we as a body make these modifications rather than leaving it up to bill drafters who are, of course, absolutely competent. But I just think if we're writing our own rules, we want to make sure that we get it right at this stage of the game. I do think that it's also further indicative of the collaborative process with which individual members of this body have engaged in the conversation around these rules. You've heard myself and others stand and say that we do not necessarily agree with the modification of rules during the second half of the biennium, that it could potentially be problematic for a number of reasons, but I think that disagreement does not necessarily preclude one from participating and ensuring that the modifications are done appropriately or at least accurately. I think that, we've seen now 2 substantive amendments pass from Senator John Cavanaugh, who had also said that he was generally opposed to the possible modifications of rules. Senator Conrad has brought this. I've spoken with the speaker as well about rules and concerns or questions that I've had. And I want to say that I think that the speaker and other members of the Rules Committee engaging in these kind of negotiations and conversations is huge. And I think that that is part of what gives me hope and optimism moving forward in this legislative session, is that there can be these conversations and that we can work together and that we can find ways to disagree, but still at the same time try to work to change some of the language that is just problematic or potentially detrimental to the intent of the underlying rule. To that point, I think Senator Conrad makes a couple of changes here that are helpful. I think that in a discussion about Rule Change 25, it's important to note sort of the different things that cloture does and does not apply to. Obviously, in here it says, except that motions to adopt permanent rules or amendments to the permanent rules may not be subject to cloture. I am of the belief that the modification of rules in this body should be difficult. I believe that the modification of rules in this body should not be something that's done with ease and should not be something that's done just sort of frivolously because somebody's frustrated or acting in a reactionary manner to the way that a prior session is gone or a thing that a particular senator has said. And so I think that what you're seeing with regards to the potential effect of this proposed Rule Change 25 is an enshrining of the idea that it is difficult to change the rules and it should remain so. I was not here in 2017. I know a number of senators have spoken about that, and they've talked about that protracted rules fight and how it all went down, and I think some of the issues that came out of that. But I do believe that the reason that that fight happened or that discussion happened was because the modification of the rules at that time was something that enough people disagreed with that they were able to make their voice heard. And the way that the rules were then written and would be written still moving forward with Rule Change 25 ensures that there is some actual debate and discussion around a rule change, and that the discussion surrounding a rule change is not just kept to this sort of short shot clock. I understand why we have cloture. I was doing a little bit of research over here when this rule change came up, and I didn't realize that cloture was added, I think in 1992 is what it sounded like. So I didn't realize that cloture was that relatively new of a rule in this body. But I understand why it exists. Thank you, Mr. President. I get why it exists, right? We understand that we have to get some things done. That being said, there are certain things that I do not think should be subject to that because they are of the utmost importance. And up until now, rules have not been a part of that. Even with Rule Change 25, they do remain sort of at a higher level of debate by ensuring that cloture is not going to be on that portion of that. So I think that this rule reflects, or this proposed rule change reflects a lot of thought. Again, I want to thank the speaker and thanks the clerk for working on this in a way that I think seeks to achieve what their goal was while still ensuring that the institution is protected as a whole. I hope we can continue to discuss this. Again, I would urge my colleagues to vote green on Senator Conrad's amendment. It is substantive, and I think makes a positive change to proposed Rule Change 25. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Duncan. Senator DeBoer, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, I want to say, I've heard a couple of people saying when bill drafters gets the rules, bill drafters never gets the rules. The rules, when they're being looked over, that's done through the clerk's office only. So our hardworking bill drafters, which I'd like to take a second out and thank, because I know that they're working really hard right now, and they probably don't see their families very much right now. And I really appreciate them. This is a precursor to, I don't know, one of the rules that's coming up later, but I want to say that they do an excellent job with their E&R amendments, and I wanted to commend them on those. Apparently in the hearing, I made it sound like they don't do an excellent job. They really do. They are human. There might be a stray mistake here or there, but they do a good job. But back to the matter at hand. This amendment has both the sort of grammatical piece, and it also adds temporary rules after the word permanent. The reason for that is we had a discussion in the committee, and actually Senator Bostar brought up that we have the exception for motions to adopt permanent rules or amendments to the permanent rules, and we would add the word temporary rules after permanent so that you would understand that all rules changes are going to be treated the same under this rule. When we asked the clerk in committee about whether that needed to be added, the clerk said, well, under Mason's manual, when you're operating under temporary rules, you can't amend those rules. And then there was a whole long discussion, and then the very last sentence he said was, at least I wouldn't hope the legislature would do that. And that gave me a little pause, so I thought, let's just put it in here, and then we don't have to worry about whether the legislature might do that, even though we're not supposed to. So that's the piece about the temporary rules, is that just making sure that we would be explicit, that all rules are going to be treated the same under this particular rule change. So colleagues, if you're wondering why we have that part of the thing there, I talked to Senator Conrad, and we sort of thought about, do we feel comfortable or uncomfortable with, we would hope the legislature wouldn't do that. And we thought, again, while we're looking under the hood, which I thought was a funny phrase, we might as well make sure we're clear. So even though that adds a few words, which I am generally against right now, it is only a few words, and I think it makes it clear. And it's also nice when you don't have to go back and look at Masons to understand what to do. So here we are. Therefore, colleagues, I would ask for your support of this amendment, which makes it a little more clear what the intention was in general, and also gets rid of our grammatical errors and makes a clear rule. Yeah, thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator DeBoer. Senator Wishart, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am still undecided as to whether I am going to support this rule change. I came into the last one leaning opposed, and because of the debate, ended up deciding that I could support that rules change. I'm not there yet with this one, mainly because I have concerns with changing cloture rules for anything. And so I wanted to, and I already asked Senator Boer if I could ask her this, I'd like to get a better understanding from her perspective of how she came into the committee reviewing this for the first time and what got her to a comfort level of being able to vote this out of committee as one of the rules she supported. So Senator DeBoer, would you yield to a question? Would you yield to that
Senator
question?
DeBoer, will you yield to a question?
Yes, I would.
And so can you explain to me a little bit your process?
Yeah, so when I was looking at all of these rules, I kind of tried to look writ large at the whole circumstances. And I was looking at how do we apply cloture? What's the sort of theory of cloture, the idea of cloture, the underlying purpose for which it exists. And the purpose for which it exists is it structures the day-to-day activities of a legislature on things like bills. So when we have a bill, it structures how long we're going to have, so everybody knows on these things that we do every day, this is how long we're going to have. We can plan for it. We know that. And if there's not going to be a filibuster, of course, it's shorter, but we know at the maximum it's going to be about 8 hours. Sometimes you like to know, when's my bill going to come up? And you see an agenda and you want to be able to figure that out. So that's one of the purposes of cloture, to move us along, to get us going on those things that we do every day. And I was thinking about this when it came before me, and it says a bill, a resolution, or a main motion. The resolutions tend to be the LRCAs, which are those constitutional amendment resolutions. And we treat them in many ways similar to a bill. They have a hearing, that sort of thing. We have hearings with our committee reports, that sort of thing. So much of what we're taking here are those day-to-day activities, and we're saying those are like bills. There are the main sort of activities of a legislature, and we want to have this kind of orderly, we know how long it's going to take kind of structure to our day-to-day activities. And so to me, those things seemed more like bills than anything else. So I wanted to make sure that we understood that we were structuring them in a similar way to bills. So when I thought about that, and I thought, if a bill only gets 8 hours of floor debate at the maximum, should we say that a motion to withdraw a bill gets unlimited debate? And that didn't make sense to me, because it seemed to me that the motion to withdraw a bill shouldn't take longer than to pass it. So I was trying to find some consistency for those day-to-day activities that we do in the legislature to make sure that, so that they had some similarity. And I frankly, I don't think everyone even knew that cloture didn't apply to those things.
1 minute.
So, yeah, that was kind of my reasoning. I thought it makes sense to apply it evenly, and it shouldn't take longer to withdraw a bill than to pass one.
Okay. Thank you, Senator Boer. That was very helpful. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Wishart and Senator DeBoer. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I know people haven't heard enough from me today. I'm looking at this, and I think I figured out we're on the second circulated piece of paper that says move to amend proposed Rule 25 to add temporary rules after permanent, and then strike the word underlying with the comma and insert a period after the second word cloture in the first sentence. So I think I get what this is getting at, and it's addressing the things that have been talked about that were brought up by Senator Wayne and Senator DeBoer, and I believe the other Senator Kavanaugh, inserting that, eliminating that superfluous comma, not to be confused with those valuable series commas that do add clarity. I would support this amendment. I think it is helping to clarify things. As to the underlying, I haven't really talked about my feelings about the underlying amendment. Like I've said all along the way, is that I'm generally been opposed to the idea of making changes to the rules at this juncture, but I have tried to be helpful as I can as we're amending them and get things in there that, maybe are these unforeseen situations. And I, again, have implored folks to pay attention, to engage in the debate and the conversation so that we can get answers to questions that we didn't know were being asked. And, like my point on the first proposal, which went through, I think, 7 iterations before we ultimately adopted it, including my proposal that then got changed and adopted to the speaker's proposal, and then another proposal that I suggested that had some conversation about what really that would do. I think that was all valuable, but my point is that these conversations are not superfluous, like the comma that we have in here. They are necessary, like the series comma, adding clarity, helping to make sure that what we're putting on paper is actually accurate. And so it's helpful to have these conversations, drill down so we all know what main motion means, meaning what we're changing here. And then once we figure that out, we can understand we're all talking about the same thing. If we're talking about committee reports for appointments, which is the one that I think about the most, but the withdrawal of bills, that we know that's what we're adding to the cloture rule. Because I think too many people just see rules change, we need to do this, let's do it. And they're not really taking the opportunity, as Senator Conrad says, this learning opportunity to get a better understanding of what it is we're changing here. But you all are going to live under these rules, so I think it's really important that you take a minute to think about it before you cast that vote. And whichever objective you think it serves, be sure that it actually serves that. There's the story from a couple years ago of the state of Minnesota inadvertently legalizing marijuana because they didn't read the bill before they voted for it. And so they thought they were doing one thing, and they actually, legalized, I think, edibles or something like that in marijuana. So just make sure you're paying attention. Like Senator Wayne pointed out, the problem with the comma here. In that Minnesota case, I think it was a problem with a decimal point in the amount of allowable, thank you, Mr. President, the allowable THC in a product. So if you shift that comma, it's a lot more. So I think that's really important. I do think it's good for folks to take a look. We've got this amendment. It took me a minute, and I've been kind of engaged all day, had a couple amendments circulating around to put the two together. So I'm in favor of this change, but I think everybody needs to make sure they are looking at it and making sure that they know what they're voting on, how it's going to change the amendment as written, and actually the amendment as not written on this paper, but as amended by my proposal that was already adopted, and make sure that we are all literally and figuratively on the same page when we are moving forward with all these. But again, there's other rules we're going to debate. Take the same care and constructive criticism and critical eye to look at these before you adopt them. So let's and propose those changes so that we can get in there and make sure that we get the changes. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator John Kavanaugh. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. So the way that rules are debated, well, more how the information is shared and managed is vastly different from a bill, an amendment. So there's nowhere on the website like you would have on the agenda. You can't just like click on the rule and then it has all of the same things that you would see or expect to see for a bill, and then the amendments and motions. So what you have to do is read the journal. And it's a good thing that we have our journal clerk who takes such care with our journal. And our journal is the written record of what happens here. So thank you for that, Jenny. But the journal the daily journal tells us everything that happened, the business that happened during the course of the floor time. And you will hear the clerk read things across, read bills across what? I guess we mean by across the desk. Read it across the desk like it's gone. Carol hands Brandon the thing, he reads it, and then he hands it to Jenny. I guess that's across. It goes, there's 3 people up front. Well, there's 4 or 5. We have Diane, Carol, Brandon, Jenny, and Dick. So, but it goes across the desk, it's read across into the record, into the journal, and you have to go and look at the daily journal to see, well, you'll see all kinds of things. You'll see bills that were introduced. You'll see resolutions that were introduced. You will also see the rules, but they will only be on the day. Well, you can download the whole journal, which is over 300 pages already on day 6 or 7. So you can go to the whole journal, or you can go each day and just look at what happened that day, and you can find if rules were submitted, which if you look at the journal, I think on the first day is when most of the rules that Speaker Arch and Senator Ehrman introduced. And then the next day's journal had additional rules from Senator Wayne, Jay Kavanaugh, and Hansen. And then there's amendments to the rules and motions to the rules, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But you have to find them all in the journal. Why is she telling us this? Because you might want to know. A lot of people apparently watch public access TV all day. I think Senator Erdman said it in his opening about how many people watch the floor debate in the legislature. I too have found that over the interim, people stop me in the grocery store a lot to talk about the floor debate. And I'm always fascinated. I'm like, wow, this is great. I hope you all donate to our public TV. So if you want to follow along, if you're in the legislature or at home, you need to go to the legislative website, go to the calendar, and go to each day that we've been in session so far this year and look at the journal. You could go to today, when the daily journal is updated for today, you could go to the whole journal and see everything that's happened up to today. And as you might assume, the daily journal will not be posted as soon as we adjourn, because the lovely Miss Jenny has work to do, because we cause her a lot of headaches. She doesn't say that, I say that. Mostly it's me that causes her headaches.
1 minute.
Thank you. If you want to follow along, go to the legislative website, go to today's agenda, and then go to the journal. And the journal will tell you what the rules are that have been introduced, what rules have been kicked out of committee, what are the amendments that are pending, and the order that they are on there is the order that they were introduced. Because normally you can look at the legislative website to see the order of introduced amendments and priority motions, et cetera. But for this particular type of debate, you must go to the journal. I think I'm about out of time. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Michaela Kavanaugh. Senator Conrad, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just wanted to lift up a couple of other key points in the context of this debate and really appreciate the good conversation that's happening on the floor and off the mic as people are digging into these important matters that help to govern our debate and deliberation and work on behalf of Nebraskans as we solidify and make some changes to our permanent rules. So the first thing, and it maybe is just a refresher from where the speaker rightly started us out this morning, that's important to remember is that typically we take up potential changes to our permanent rules kind of at the start of the biennium instead of in our system in Nebraska, we typically don't take up a lot of rule changes every year, and particularly in the short session. That being said, it does happen from time to time for a variety of different reasons, and there is a process available to do so. So there's no question that the rules came into play, were tested, were a great topic of debate during the challenging 2023 session. And I think that we actually learned a lot together that was constructive during those debates and deliberations about technical updates we needed to make to our rules, certain rules changes that we could effectuate that explicitly codified precedent that sometimes had been fuzzy or was a frequent point of contention as evidenced through our debate last year. And then the other categories of rules that have been discussed a lot in the interim and put forward before the Rules Committee and now the full body that at the start of this session, really, I think in some ways are an attempt to be responsive to issues that were identified during last year's debate. And in another camp, I think there are persistent, perennial issues that various members have brought forward at various times for various reasons that seek to undermine the unique features of the unicameral legislature, including nonpartisanship, transparency, and a strong opportunity for minority rights. So I think when you are looking at kind of this first set of proposals that have come up, they're really more technical in nature. They're really about codifying precedent. And you can see that those proposals that were put forward did not garner a significant amount of public engagement through the online comment portals or at the public hearing. I think most of the public feedback was in regard to the more controversial and contentious aspects, which seek to undermine our unique nonpartisan unicameral legislature. So that being said, as I approached the rules debate and heard a lot about these issues in conversation with colleagues in the interim period, I appreciate and understand the principled position that some members hold that we should not change any of the rules at this juncture of where we are in the legislative session for a lot of different reasons. That is a completely legitimate, principled approach to entering this debate. Thank you, Mr. President. So I'm taking into account that policy option in addition to the fact that as entered into the political dialogue is a significant set of rules changes that I find to be incredibly detrimental to the institution and to the debate. And so doing a quick vote card, doing a lot of conversations with our colleagues, it seems that there is a consensus amongst serious leaders in the body that there are going to be some rules changes. So working with that pragmatic, practical reality, I really have appreciated how the speaker and others have come together to try and make sure that the changes that we're taking up are responsive, are responsible, and help to strengthen the institution and facilitate robust debate as it should be. So I just
Time.
want to thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Conrad. Senator DeBoer, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Wishart's question actually got me thinking about talking about the way in which cloture operates in general, and to say, you know, why I think it's important that we extend it to these everyday sorts of concerns that the legislature deals with. Cloture was established in the early 90s in our body. I don't know for sure, but it possibly was an even year addition to the rules. I don't know. That might be something Senator Conrad would know. This isn't a history of cloture so much as like a folklore of cloture. The idea was to save time because filibusters were going on for much longer than 8 hours on an individual issue. It's my understanding, in fact, again, this is the folklore, that at some point it wasn't 8 hours, that this 8 hours piece is sort of new, that it was 12 hours on general file at some point, and that was the practice, that cloture was 12 hours. Then it was reduced to 8. I don't know if it had a year or two at 10 between those, but it was reduced to 8. And then when I came in, it was 6 hours on general file, but it was in 2 segments. So if you're new here or newish here, this is how it used to go. It was in 2 3-hour segments. At the end of the first 3-hour segment, if it appeared that your bill was being filibustered, my critique was, how can you even tell after 3 hours? Because sometimes you actually just want to make the bill better, and it takes 3 hours to get through not even very many of us to try and discuss that. But if it went 3 hours, the first time it was up, then you had to go around and talk to your colleagues and get a vote card, which has all our names on them and columns for yes and no. You had to get a vote card, fill it out with how everybody was feeling about the bill, and then you showed it to the speaker. And if you had about 30-ish, it takes 33 to get cloture, if you had about 30-ish yeses, then the speaker would reschedule it for its second 3 hours under the idea that you could get maybe a few more votes. But if you couldn't show 30, you just never got rescheduled. The result of that was that there were a lot of bills in here that we just didn't vote on. And there was a lack of transparency with that kind of bugged me. It was expedient. We got through things. It was expedient, but it lacked transparency. And so Speaker Hilgers went back to the 8-hour rule, which is 8 hours of debate on general file, and then 4 on select and 2 on final reading. And Senator Arch continued that tradition. Or is it 1 on final reading? I don't even remember. 2. Okay, it is 2. The point is that this tradition of sort of trying to manage our time in here is something that we've been working on for a while. And it hasn't always been incredibly clear-cut about how to best manage time. And sometimes we've tried to manage time by doing something like the 3-hour rule, and it had unintended consequences
1 minute.
of getting away with some of the transparency. My hope is, yes, Senator Wishart, I suppose we are adding these new circumstances to when we will have cloture. My hope is that we will not have unintended consequences. I'm glad we're having this debate to think about whether or not that might happen. And I don't foresee any at this time, but if we do, we might have to revisit this in the long session. So, you know, I'm going to vote for this rule change. I think that it should not take longer to withdraw a bill than it does to pass a bill. So ultimately, seeing how cloture has evolved over time, seeing that there are good and bad things that can come from lessening the amount of time, putting time restrictions on our debate, and also that it's reasonable at some point on these everyday activities to have restrictions. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator DeBoer. Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're recognized to speak.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am a learner. I did once I did the those Gallup strength finders, and one of my top 5 was learner. I very much am a learner. I love learning things. So between my last time and this time, I was like, I'm going to go check out the legislative website to see about, you know, what I was talking about before, because I was just kind of doing it off the top of my head. But that sent me down a rabbit hole of looking at the legislative website, which is so fun. But then I also got out my rule book, which is a bright color. And okay, I don't know what this color is called, but every year the previous clerk, and it seems to be a tradition that the current clerk has picked up, would do a very bright color for the rule book, because he told me, this is Mr. Patrick O'Donnell, the longest serving clerk of the legislature in the country, by the way. He told me that he liked to know when people were looking at the rule book on the floor, and if it was a bright color, identifiable color, he could see people in their seats when they were looking at the rule book, which I thought was an interesting thing to do. And there's a lot of things about the legislature that are just about pure observation. And the pages, you have a front row seat. So when you see this bright orange book, that is the rule book that everybody is looking at or not looking at. I don't know. Okay, so I was looking at it and I was like, oh, we're on Rule 7. So I should probably look at how this is written in the rule book. And the Rule 7, Section 1, this is Section 10, but Section 1, I'm just going to share this because I thought this was fascinating. Meeting time restrictions. The legislature shall meet annually at 10 a.m. on the first Wednesday after the first Monday in January of each year, and thereafter on each legislative day at 9 a.m. unless otherwise ordered by a majority vote of its members present and voting thereon. And it goes on. But that is in our Constitution. It is in Article 3, Section 10. It is in our Constitution that we have to come here this year on January 3rd. Was it January 3rd? Yeah, at 10 a.m. Now, it takes a vote of the people to change the Constitution, but maybe we should consider a constitutional amendment that adds a tiny bit of flexibility to a Nebraska legislature not starting 3 days into January. I'm just putting it out there. It does seem like that was maybe slightly ill-conceived considering the weather that we deal with here in January. But the thing that I found fascinating even more so, because I already knew that it was in the Constitution that we had to start on the first Wednesday after the first Monday of the new year, which means the latest that we can ever start is if the new year is on a Tuesday, because the next first Monday. So there you go. That's the latest we can ever start. Is no, wait. Is that right? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I'm looking over at the press. They're like, you're my phone a friend right now. Thanks. Okay, so thank you. But the thing that I found interesting that's in the Constitution beyond the very early start date is that we must commence at 10 a.m. We put in the Constitution a specific time of day that we have to start the first day of session every year. I don't know why, that just struck me as kind of silly. So back to what I was talking about, and I think, do I have one more time? Do I have one more time, Ethan? Yes? Okay. Okay, so what I was talking about was how you can follow along what we are doing at home. So if you go to the legislature website and you go to the homepage, this is just a font of information. And there's so much information in this institution on a daily basis, especially when we're in session.
Time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, and you are the next in the queue to speak, and this is your third and final time.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. Okay, so there's so much information on the legislative website that it can be overwhelming. And I remember my first year, I did not know. First of all, we have these things on our desk. I didn't know that the long white sheet was the worksheet order. And I was like, I don't know what that even means until somebody told me. And I actually did inform Senator Bozen when she started mid-session last year about the worksheet order. So Senator Meyer, I should probably be coming by your desk sometime to give you a tutorial on the worksheet order. But the worksheet order is a fascinating piece of information, and you can find it on the website. Senators, we have them on our desk here. And the worksheet order tells you the order in which a bill is introduced in reference to a committee. So we've got all the committees down below, and you can see there are 156 bills in judiciary right now. Now, some of those are carryovers from last year and some are new for this year. And then you go up to the top of it, and you can see the bills that have been put on general file, put on select file, final reading, enrollment and review, passed, approved by the governor, line item vetoed, and on and on and on. So that's one thing that you can find on the legislative website that I think is extremely helpful. But there's so many other things. The calendar. Now, the calendar is important for multiple reasons. But if you are trying to look up something that happened last year, like earlier in this debate, I was trying to figure out what we called committee reports. So, and I knew we had committee reports towards the end of session last year. So I went to the calendar and I went back to May of 2023, and I just started looking at agendas at the end of May of 2023. I only had to look at 2 because I had a fairly good idea of when we did that. But that's a good tool to use as well. And if you put in, there's a bill number in the current bill search. If you put in a bill number for this current legislature, and it's a biennium, so it's a 2-year legislature. And so for the 108th legislature, if you put in any bill number that has been introduced from January of last year through today, then you can go and see all the activity that I was talking about earlier that you cannot see with the rules debate. So back to how you follow the rules debate. So you go on the homepage of the legislature and you click on View Day 7 activity. Today is Day 7. It's not available yet, but underneath on this page, there is a link to the agenda, a print-friendly agenda, hearing schedules, there aren't any for today, introduce legislation, the journal daily, and it's gray right now and it'll be a darker gray later. That is where you go and look and see what transpired, what was introduced, what votes were taken, and et cetera. And then you have the journal full, so that'll be the journal from the first day of this session through today. A summary sheet, I actually am not entirely clear on what the summary sheet is, because I feel like is it a summary of the journal, maybe? It's a summary of the journal. The journal clerk, of course, knows this. And then the worksheet, which I just told you all. And then this is also where you can find the transcript. And this is important. If you say, earlier today, I was talking about a transcript of floor debate that I thought was kind of egregious and inappropriate.
1 minute.
You can go back to that date of debate and look at this date and look at the transcript. So shout out to transcribers. Thank you very much for all of your hard work. Okay, so that's how you do it. That's how you follow along. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Just, click here, 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 and then go back because you clicked the wrong place, and then go forward again, Here, here, here. And then you can follow us. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Conrad, you're recognized to close.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, colleagues, for the thoughtful debate on this measure. Appreciate Senator Wayne lifting up the technical corrections. Appreciate working with the speaker and the clerk and their respective staffs to incorporate that into the measure that the amendment that I already had pending, and would ask for your supportive vote of this amendment to the proposed rule change in front of the body. Thank you, Mr. President.
The question before the body is the adoption of the Conrad Amendment to propose rule change number 25, Arch Rule 7, Section 10. All those in favor vote aye. All those opposed vote nay. Mr. Clerk, record.
35 ayes, 2 nays on the adoption of the amendment, Mr. President.
The Conrad Amendment is adopted. Mr. Clerk.
Mr. President, next on the bill, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh would reconsider the vote just taken on the Conrad Amendment.
Senator Cavanaugh, you're recognized to open.
Creature of habit. I just throw up those reconsider motions. Yeah, so I think I was saying that I'm a learner, and as such, sometimes I like to share what I'm learning. I will say, and this is not intentional, but Senator Chambers also instructed the body and those at home on what he was doing as he was doing it so that people could follow along and learn. And I, again, being a learner, my seat at that time was where Senator Day is, 2 rows ahead of me. And I think Senator Chambers was directly behind Senator Hunt. So I had a nice sight line, and I would just sit and follow along in the rules while he was talking. And it was very helpful, very instructional. And so I like to, carry that forward and allow others to also learn the process. And today is a particularly interesting day for me personally because everybody has referenced 2017, but my time in the legislature, we haven't really had a very intense rules debate before today. I introduced some rules last year, but they didn't get out of committee, and they were things that it's nice to have, need to have, hope to have. So should I continue educating everyone? Okay, all right. Nice to have, need to have. Sorry. I'm going to talk off rules for a second. I love this place, and I love the people in this place, the people that work here that take such great care. And last year was really hard for, I think, everyone in here, everyone out there, everyone up there and up there. It was really hard. But this today has been really nice. It's been nice. We've had some interesting conversation. I've gotten an opportunity to talk about the Oxford comma, which you all know I love to do. I signed on to a bill. Thank you, Senator Von Gilren, for bringing that around. I'm very excited about it. I agreed to vote Senator Jacobson's bill out of committee. There's been a lot of collegiality. It's felt more like it did in previous years. And I really appreciate that. I wasn't really intending to talk this much today. I kind of thought other people were going to be talking about all of this, but here we are. So I just wanted to take a moment to note that. Oh, although I do have a bone to pick with Senator Reapy, but that's, we'll settle that in the parking lot later. Oh, he knows what he did. So, okay. How much time do I have? Oh, Madam President, how much time do I have?
6 minutes and 12 seconds.
Okay, thank you, Madam President. It's nice to see you back up in the chair. Gentlemen, I'm going to be a little sexist here for a minute, but I will say that the two best people in the chair in this body are Senator DeBoer and Senator Slama. They really, again, know how to run a meeting. So I appreciate having you back up in the chair, Madam President. Okay. Motion to reconsider is what we are on now. So again, you look at the board. This is fun for the pages. Probably not fun, but I'm going to pretend like you're having fun. You look like you're having fun. Okay. So you look at the board, and if we were to go to a vote right now, like let's say that this had cloture on it, this is what we would do. Cloture would be down there. So we would vote on cloture. Then we would vote on the motion to reconsider the amendment. Then we would vote on the rule itself. If this were a cloture vote, we would move our way up the board. And I think that's what Senator DeBoer and Senator Wayne were discussing about this very rule change. It's a main motion. And that was my concern about priority motion versus a main motion. A main motion would be the top thing on the board. A priority motion would never be the top thing because you're putting it on to a bill or a rule. So a main motion, top of the board. Priority motion is a motion that you are attaching to something. So a main motion can stand alone. So there you go. When you're looking at the green board, the board is new. I think last year we got the board, and it has taken some getting used to because it's very bright. I am definitely not used to the screens on the sides here, though I can't decide if they're easier to see than the one that was there, but my brother, Senator John Kavanaugh, last year, because I talked about the screen so much, so he got me opera glasses so that I could see the screen. I haven't tried them out yet on there, but if any of the pages come up to my desk and they're like, why are there opera glasses? That's because my very thoughtful brother, or maybe he was just fed up with me complaining about the screen, got me rose gold opera glasses. So, okay. And how much time do I have left, Madam President?
3 minutes, 17 seconds.
Okay. So this current rule change that we're on, I'm not entirely clear on how you can follow the amended rules that are coming on the floor today if you're at home. Is there a way to do that? Because they are published in the journal, but the journal isn't published until we adjourn. So is there a way for people at home to actually see the amendments that we are debating that have been introduced on the floor today? No? Okay. So that it makes it even more important for us to be very clear here because it has been passed out on paper. That's how we all are able to read the amendment. And this is how they used to do it back in the olden days. Before everything was on a computer, the people at home wouldn't be able to see the amendments in real time. They would, because we would have the paper. So, and I do remember that from last year's rule debate, that paper motions were handed out. It does take changing the way you think about all of this, because it's like, I was following everything along on worksheet order. I was following the agenda. I was following the amendments that are filed. And now you have to change how you follow those things. So I will say it's been a learning curve for me personally, but I think I'm slightly catching up. So we have the underlying rule change, Rule 7, Section 10. Then we have Senator John Kavanaugh's amendment that I believe was already voted on, which is to insert or the vice chair of the committee in the absence of the committee chair. And that is to introduce, consent to introduce on behalf of the principal introducer. And then we have Senator Conrad's.
1 minute.
Thank you. To amend proposed rule change 25 to add temporary rules after permit and strike underlying and insert a period after the second word cloture in the first sentence. I think I have I'm next in the queue, and just to give a heads up, if I'm going to maybe ask Senator Conrad if she would yield to a question. So can we just go to my next time on the queue?
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. You are indeed Senator Michaela Kavanaugh next in the queue.
Thank you, Senator Wendy DeBoer. Senator Conrad, would you yield to a question?
Senator Conrad, would you yield?
Absolutely. I'm sorry, I'm just reading over your amendment, and I know you have talked about it, and somehow I did not absorb the information that you were sharing. Add temporary rules after permanent. Can you explain it to me again? I'm sorry.
Sure. And apologies for having to read my handwriting, number one. So that might be
I muddled through it, not great.
Okay. That might be the first problem in terms of the lack of clarity there. But I don't know if you were on the floor or not for this portion of the debate, Senator Kavanaugh, but Senator Wayne had identified some technical issues with the proposed rule change that came to us from the Rules Committee. You had additional feedback that dealt with grammar, punctuation, capitalization, those kinds of issues to ensure accuracy and appropriateness. I happen to have a substantive amendment pending on the speaker's rules, so I worked with the speaker and his staff and the clerk and their staff, and then I think you were a part of at least some of those conversations to just kind of take those up together with the clarifying aspect that includes the component regarding the temporary rules and then the technical aspects for the punctuation, grammar, capitalization, since this process, as you rightly noted, is a bit different than our bill drafting process, and we don't have the benefit of the bill drafter's office and the E&R process to make things clear. So that was what came forward in the amendment that we had visited about that you're seeking reconsideration on.
So the part that is add temporary rules after permanent, what does that in effect do?
Right. So basically, that rule in general talks about what cloture is applied to and what it's not applied to. So the rule clarifies that cloture will not be applied to debate and deliberations in regards to the temporary or permanent rules.
Thank you. I'm just trying to edit all three together,
Yes.
and it gets a little jumbled. So I appreciate
Absolutely.
that clarification. And how much time do I have, Madam President?
2 minutes and 8 seconds.
Okay, I think I'll just yield my time to the chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Senators Conrad and Senator Michaela Cavanaugh. Senator Dungan, you're next in the queue.
Thank you, Madam President. I just wanted to make a quick point here, and I think it's a little bit separate apart from what we're talking about. We've talked multiple times on the floor about the bill drafters and them writing things with regards to the rules. It's been brought to my attention that the bill drafters have nothing to do with the writing of the rules at all. They don't touch the rules. They don't draft the rules. They don't edit the rules. So I just want to make that very clear to both the folks at home and the people in this body that when we're discussing the rules, there are other individuals that may help write those or have Scrivener errors, but our bill drafters focus on drafting bills. So just wanted to make that very clear. We have other people in the clerk's office who do amazing work with that, but the bill drafters are separate and apart. So I wanted to make that clear on the mic. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Dungan. Seeing no one else in the queue, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, you're welcome to close on your motion to reconsider.
Oh, what more is there to say? I think I'm tired for the day. I will withdraw my motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Michaela Cavanaugh. Items, Mr. Clerk?
Madam President, I've got a motion from Speaker Arch with a note that he wishes to withdraw that, as well as an amendment from Senator Conrad with a note that she wishes to withdraw that. In that case, Madam President, I have nothing else pending on this proposed rule change.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Therefore, the question before the body is, seeing no one in the queue, Speaker Arch, you're welcome to close.
Thank you, Madam President. So we are voting now on rule number 25, which I introduced, expansion of cloture with the two amendments that have already been approved. And I think we are ready to move this, and I would ask for your yes vote. Thank you. I would like to call the House.
There has been a request to place the House under call. The question is, shall the House go under call? All those in favor, say aye, vote aye. All those opposed, vote nay. Record, Mr. Clerk.
31 ayes, no nays, place House under call.
The House is under call. Senators, please record your presence. Those unexcused senators outside the chamber, please return to the chamber and record your presence. All unauthorized personnel, please leave the floor. The House is under call. The House is under call. Senator Halloran, please return to the chamber. The House is under call. All unexcused members are now present. The question before the body is the adoption of the amendment to the permanent rules proposed rule change number 25 by Speaker Arch, which would amend Rule 7, Section 10. All those in favor, vote aye. All those opposed, vote nay. Have all voted who care to? Record, Mr. Clerk.
35 ayes, 3 nays in the adoption of the proposed rule change amendment.
The rules change amendment has been adopted. Mr. Clerk, I raise the call.
Madam President, some items quickly. Amendments to be printed, Senator Clements to LB 1067. In addition, Senator Clements has designated LB 1067 as his personal priority bill for the session. New bills, Legislative Bill 1171, introduced by Senator Hardin, is a bill for an act relating to the Pharmacy Practice Act, amends sections 38, 28, 47, changes verification requirements for pharmacy technicians, repeals the original section. Legislative Bill 1172, introduced by Senator Von Gillern, is a bill for an act relating to public health and welfare, amends sections 81,647 and 81,663, changes requirements relating to requests for data access for research purposes, change the legislative intent for release of data, and repeals the original section. Legislative Bill 1173, introduced by Senator Repe, is a bill for an act relating to vital statistics, amends sections 37101, 7160101, section 71605, and section 71612. Defines the term, provides the use of abstracts, death prescribed, provides for payment fees, change provisions relating to death certificates, and repeals the original section. Legislative Bill 1174, introduced by Senator Hansen's bill for an act relating to roads, amends sections 391410, 391722, 391724, and 25. Change provision relating to section lines and vacation or abandonment of public roads, harmonize provisions, and repeals the original section. Series of name adds: Senator Holdcroft to LB 61, Senator Aguilar to LB 51, Wayne 825, Ibach 856, Senator Raybold 856, Lippincott 872, Senator Conrad LB 920, Raybold to LB 933 and 952, Senator Lippincott to LB 974, Senator Albright, Hughes, Merman, all to LB 984, Senator Jacobson and Linehan, Boston, and Clements to LB 999, Senator Albright to LB 1023, Senator McDonald to LB 1035, Senator Jacobson and Lippincott and Clements to LB 1061, Senator Ibach to LB 1071, Senator Raybold Merman to LB 1087, Senator Schlamman to LB 1096, Senator Ibach to LB 1125, Senator McKinney to LB 1126, Senator Vargas 1133. Finally, Madam President, priority motion. Senator Merman would move to adjourn the body until Friday, January 12th, 2024 at 10 o'clock a.m. 10 o'clock a.m.
You've heard the motion, colleagues. The question is, shall the legislature adjourn? I'm sorry, colleagues. Senator Aguilar, before we vote on the motion, is recognized for an announcement.
Thank you, Madam President. Final reminder to everyone that tomorrow at noon is the deadline to submit a bill request to the bill drafting staff in order to guarantee the bill will be ready for introduction before adjournment on the 10th legislative day. Requests received after noon tomorrow will be drafted if time permits. However, priority will be given to the requests received before the noon deadline. Members are advised to please submit your drafting request as soon as they can and not wait until the deadline if at all possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Aguilar. Now the question before the body is, shall the legislature adjourn? All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. The legislature is adjourned.